Greetings, YouTube. This is Remarkable Republican, here to bring you the truth with a truth-flavored bias. In the 90s, I was a huge fan of Ultimate Dune, and it never occurred to me that something like that could be made into a movie. And yet, in 2021, it was. I wasn't aware of the existence of Dune, the movie, until over Christmas break it happened to be on at one of my relatives' houses. And so, I looked into it, I watched it, and I found that it was quite different than anything that I had thought it would be. And so today what I'm going to do is provide a review of the Dune movie and also talk about my expectations for part 2. I will not be sparing anyone's feelings as I talk about what this movie does well and what it does poorly. I, again, am a huge fan of The Ultimate Dune, so my expectations for this are quite high, and I don't feel all that entitled making demands of people who work with the IPs that I grew up loving. Let's talk about what the movie is, for those of you who might not know. Again, this movie was not well advertised. I didn't know it existed until a couple weeks ago. But Dune is a two-part film which tries to create a science fiction backstory for the classic first-person shooter, The Ultimate Dune. As for the story itself, the game didn't really have a ton of material in terms of story, so almost all the story here is brand new. My main complaint here, and something that seems to be lost on a lot of people, is that this really is not what we'd call loyal to the source material. Because even though there wasn't that much to begin with, what was there has largely been ignored, and it looks like they just took the name and made a fairly generic, weird sci-fi movie in order to get people to go watch it by using that popular name. So let's talk about how the game unfolds. Like I said, the game actually doesn't have that much of a story per se. You don't have a lot of cutscenes or anything like that. But what you do have is an unnamed soldier that people call Dune Guy, and he has to escape hell and return to Earth. And to do that, he has to not only shoot his way through a lot of areas full of demons and undead things, but he also has to find a lot of key cards that are hidden, and then he has to use those to unlock doors. So it's kind of a puzzle game as well as a first-person shooter. And given that that's the basis of the gameplay, any movie you might make on it could, I don't know, feature some of that. Some of the finding key cards or shooting stuff. I was really excited to learn that Dune had been made into a movie. And so my brother, who apparently knew about this and didn't tell me, told me to write down my expectations about what the movie would be. So that's what I did, and then we watched it together. And at the end, unfortunately, we both had to agree that my version was far better, even though I actually did not put a lot of effort into writing this little outline. So my outline that I wrote before watching the movie, based on having played the games, is this. There was some kind of weather control experiment, or some other science experiment, that was messing with physics and the sky, and it caused an interdimensional portal to open. And this led to hell coming to Earth, as in Dune 2. Well, that happens, and now you have demons wandering around killing people. As far as how we get to Dune Guy, this is a person who's kind of like an unnamed, mysterious figure. He lives out in the desert by himself. He drives a dune buggy, and he is very kind of fit, but also gruff. Maybe he has some PTSD from being a veteran. He's kind of like a modern Clint Eastman, a guy who doesn't really say a whole lot, but whose face is very expressive and who ultimately is a very moral, upstanding character. At a certain point, the demons make it out to the desert, and Dune Guy has to fight them. And so he has an arsenal of weapons at home, and he settles upon a double-barreled shotgun and some other iconic weapons, kills a bunch of demons. He travels to some city, and he's looking for an escape. And so he then finds key cards. Along the way, he meets a woman, maybe like an ex-wife or something. They have some sort of romance, whether new or old. Maybe he has multiple girls, and he saves them, and then so there's the romance side angle to go along with the demon killing, and then they escape somewhere safe, and that's the movie. I figured that's probably what Hollywood would do. It's the most obvious thing with the Dune franchise. But instead, we got something entirely different and something that, again, was worse in every conceivable way. So instead of unlocking doors and blasting monsters with shotguns, we instead have an interplanetary political drama about the moral evils of stealing spice from sandworms. This is kind of like making a moral issue of stealing honey from bees. We also have the idea that certain planets are like third world countries being exploited by first world planets. So there's like this thing about colonialism, and then there are mind reading witches. I don't know what any of this has to do with Dune. This is all just meaningless nonsense. There also aren't any demons, which is kind of a massive failure on the part of the director and all the people responsible for this. I guess you could say that metaphorically there are demons driving people to use spice, which is a kind of drug, but Dune is not about metaphors and poetry and all that kind of soft stuff. Dune is about taking shotguns and killing stuff and making them piles of blood. You also have really lame weapons, so this movie does have weapons, but the weapons are really uninspiring. So rather than the BFG or the chain gun, we have instead baby swords that look stupid because they're like the teeth of sandworms. And then we have wimpy blue shields that are people's personal shields that don't actually stop anything. And it's just kind of a weird, awkward glow around people that makes their skin look like they're in front of an old desktop computer at night. It's really just incredibly stupid. I don't know what the fuck they were thinking. Now, the graphics were pretty cool. I have to give them that. The movie looks nice. The desert looks nice. The costumes are pretty neat. The vehicles look good. But all that's wasted because they really don't understand what Dune is supposed to be. I get the impression that these guys have never played the game. I'm already plenty mad about them taking the name of this great video game Dune and running it through the mud this way. But I know that there's an even more offensive layer to this, and that is that, much like any other cool thing in the world, it is being used to further the commie and queer agenda. If you go back to the 90s when Dune came out, it certainly was not a vehicle for the commie and queer agenda. It was a video game. It was fun. It was fast-paced. It was cutting edge. But what they did with this movie is a disgrace on every level. Let's talk about some of the elements of this film that are deeply offensive and all too typical of the kind of Hollywood elitism that we see today. First of all, the main bad guy is the Baron. And this is a character ripped straight out of the video game. There's also a Baron in the game, but the Baron is a cyber demon. The Baron in this is just some fat guy. And rather than having any kind of special powers, he's just a very rich industrialist who owns enough to have his own army. So there's nothing special about him, and he is being mocked effectively for being fat. So it's fat phobic, but also as an industrialist, he's a job creator and he gets no credit for that. He's instead portrayed as pure evil. But again, we're not sure entirely why he's pure evil compared to the guys who are replacing him. Because both families are a lot alike. Both families have these weird foreign names. Their names are Harkonnen and Atreides. So they have these foreign names, and they're always unfamiliar. They also are kind of ethnic-looking people, so they're kind of the same in many ways, and it's unclear why the Atreides are supposed to be better than the Harkonnens. So, again, they're going to do all the same stuff. They're going to be, I guess, pumping spice or pumping oil, however you want to think about it. I mean, clearly that's what they mean by that. And also because the heroes are increasingly the side against spice production, this means that environmental terrorism is being celebrated. So the people who are sabotaging the spice operation in many ways are being celebrated as heroes. And the son of the incoming family, whose family gets killed by the Baron, is named Paul. So he's the new heir of the Atreides, or however you say their name. And he is portrayed as a kind of gay liberal Jesus. So he's kind of going native and embracing the desert people, the Fremen, who are committing all this environmental terrorism. So he's really just betraying his father's legacy because his father came there to pump spice, and Paul is there to stop it. And it's pretty obvious that the Fremen, based on the way that they dress in these robes and everything, are space Muslims. It's also obvious that they will win in part 2 because they've joined forces with Paul and the other Atreides people. And really, having a movie where Muslims come out of the desert and kill everyone else and kill people who are being productive, why don't you just go pee on the graves of the 9/11 victims or the 10/7 victims? Because that's what you're doing with this movie by allowing the movie to unfold this way. And again, what does any of this have to do with Dune? Where in the game does Dune guy talk about how industry is bad or how we shouldn't be taking products from animals? That's just not a thing that happens in the fucking games. And yet here we are with the commie and queer agenda of Hollywood making that what this movie based on the game is about. Whenever I see liberals trying to make memes something that they're very bad at, they often use the phrase do better. Well, I think we need to do better. And the way to do that is to build upon the idea that I had in my last video, where we take a game studio in the American South, but it's not only a game studio, it's also one for turning gaming IPs into movies. Because a lot of times what we have when we have game movies is that people take beloved, great IPs and then put a bunch of trash stuff with them to try to sell to fans. So rather than having weird trash like this movie riding the coattails of Dune, we could instead have a real Dune movie like the one I laid out earlier. And I'm quite convinced at this point that had a movie been loyal to what Dune actually is and followed the formula that I laid out earlier, it would have been one of the 10 best movies ever made. I would say maybe between the 7th and 10th best movie of all time. So I don't think it's that hard. And I think that if we get Stars and Bars Gaming off the ground, that it really will take the world by storm and change everything. Change everything for the better, that is. Just like escaping hell with Dune Guy. Until next time, I'm Remarkable Republican, bringing you the truth with a truth-flavored bias, signing out.